Hello and welcome to the Let's Get Mental podcast. I'm your host, Archie, and today joining me is Bry,
Hello.
Ollie,
Hi.
and Casey.
Hello.
And today's podcast, we are going to be talking about depression and low mood. So one thing I obviously want to stress at the start of this podcast is that we might be talking about quite sensitive subjects. People might get, we want to have a bit of a trigger warning here on the podcast before we actually start getting into deep subjects, as they could mention things like self-harm and suicide. But we're going to move on to our first subject today on the podcast, which is what does depression look like? So I'm going to move straight over to Bry first of all, as I want you to take it away and explain what you think depression looks like.
Hi. Yeah, I thought I'd kind of briefly touch on some of the kind of boring side of it. So I'm a psychology student, doing a degree in psychology. And some of the stuff we talk about is, the classification and how illnesses such as depression are diagnosed. And there are two different types of that, types of manuals that are used by clinicians all around the world, or in the UK, to diagnose depression. So there's the DSM, which is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and it's currently on its fifth version. And then you've also got the International and Classification of Diseases manual, which is abbreviated to the ICD, and that's on its 10th edition. And I just think it's quite interesting to look at, the actual diagnostic criteria for depression. And both these manuals require an individual to meet a certain number of symptoms from a set list in order to be diagnosed. They differ slightly in terms of what is required and what's not. But these symptoms include things like difficulty sleeping, loss of interest in things you used to enjoy, difficulty eating, so maybe putting on weight, losing weight.
So just wanted to ask myself ask a question. So these are used to diagnose if somebody has depression. These are actually what the manuals are used for. So they look at a certain criteria and see, like, if this person ticks these boxes, then we say they are we diagnose them with depression. Is that what these are basically doing?
Yeah, so these are used, throughout the NHS, privately as well, by clinicians involved in mental health, and they kind of, they're basically the tick boxes, to say, this person has depression. I think I think it's the DSM, where you need 5 of the symptoms in order to be diagnosed with depression. So as long as you kind of fit the criteria, they say you have depression. But I think it's quite interesting to talk about, because obviously not everybody experiences depression the same way, and it's whether these need sort of revamping a little bit,
What
or whether we think that they're working sufficiently. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a good point that you've said there about everybody experiences depression differently, and there's many different ways to diagnose depression. So I'm going to come to Casey now. What do you think depression looks like for in your experience?
So, in my personal experience, I generally sort of start to notice smaller things to begin with that you might pass off as just, I don't know, you just don't pick it up as such, if that makes sense. Where I'll start sort of struggling with my eating, which was mentioned. I might be getting to sleep a bit later, waking up during the night, or I might go the complete opposite and I might start sleeping in. And sometimes I'll sleep something ridiculous like 14 hours a day. And it will then sort of gradually move more into getting the actual depressed feelings and the low mood. I know for myself, I've dealt with suicidal thoughts and self-harm, things like that. So I think it does vary a lot from person to person with how it affects you and also how you cope with it.
So for you personally, you found it's more of it starts as more of a routine. You don't find you're following your routine as much. You find that your things are changing. That you're not doing the things that you usually were doing during the day.
Yeah, I think you could probably put that down to me very much sort of losing the well, I don't know what the right word is to use. Sort of like I'm unable to care about certain things. I don't care as much about what my diet's like and things like that.
I think a lot of people share that with depression, because I think when you become depressed, I think you just sort of give up on doing the very small things, and they say doing anything too struggling can be quite a lot to take in. But I'm going to come to Ollie now. What would you say depression looks like?
I guess it's very difficult to sort of put a ring around try and highlight it, as it were, as a singular entity. I think Bry and Casey have both given some good examples of sort of what it can look like, as in like what symptoms people might display. Yeah, I guess looking at depression and low mood, the sort of stereotype behind it is the whole being unable to find happiness or joy in things, being sort of more lethargic about things and able to get up and do stuff. But it isn't always like that, I guess. And that's what makes it so difficult to sort of isolate as much, because you can have it vary quite drastically from day to day, where one day someone might not be able to get out of their own bed because they've just not got any energy. I mean, that's another side of it. I don't know if we've touched on yet, being about sleep being heavily affected, or people requiring a lot more sleep just to be able to do basic things. So they might have one day where you're unable to get out of bed, for example, to go do your basic university lecture things or meet friends, so it's affecting your day-to-day life there. And then other days it might be that you seem relatively unaffected. I know there's lots of metaphors around like dark clouds being over your head or something like that. And I guess looking at it like the weather can be an interesting perspective in saying that it isn't just, if you're depressed, you are always sad, because that's not the right way to try and approach it, I guess. There's a lot more nuance than that.
I definitely agree that you can't really just say, as a single entity, what does depression look like? I think I mean, when you look at somebody, you have to look for signs and say, but even then, when you're looking for signs of depression, it's very, very easy to get depression sometimes mixed up with someone just feeling a bit sad. And I think one thing that we've obviously wanted to just mention here is that, 3 in 100 people will actually experience depression alone, but 8 in 100 people will experience anxiety and depression combined. So I think one thing I want to talk about right now is just like, do we see similarities between sadness and depression? Do we think the two overlap? Do we think also that like can somebody be sad and just not be depressed? Would we say that depression is a far lower or far more severe version of being sad? But I definitely can agree with what everyone's saying about like the energy based around depression. Like when you have depression, I think doing the simplest things can become a huge task to do. As I say, even getting out of bed can be extremely difficult. So I'm just going to come back to Bry. Would you say that it's realistic about 8 in 100 people will only experience anxiety and depression?
I think there's probably some truth to that. I also think that with mental health, you can never quite trust the statistics wholeheartedly, because there are a lot of people that just don't come forward, aren't recognised, don't seek help, so therefore they're not accounted in the numbers. But I think especially disorders such as anxiety and depression, it's a really tricky one, because a lot of people experience anxiety and obviously, like you say, feelings of sadness. Those are common emotions for us to feel as human beings. It's when those become unmanageable and start to affect your day-to-day life. So I think a lot of people, can probably relate to anxiety and depression, but I think those disorders are not just the emotion. They are, as I say, we've touched on, depression is not just feeling sad. It's, having absolutely no energy in you, or, going the complete other end and constantly doing things because you can't stop your mind from overthinking, or, there's so many different aspects to depression other than just the feeling of sadness. So I think it's a lot more complicated than people realise some of the time.
I think the obviously one of the worst parts about depression is obviously the people that don't kind of acknowledge it, the ones that sort of bottle it up and actually don't let the feelings come out. They don't obviously talk about it. I've known people that very much don't almost don't believe that depression exists. Obviously, mental health, it doesn't really exist in a sense, and and even though themselves would be considered very depressed, and that they find it hard to have motivation to get out of bed, but yet they still think that they're just being normal. But I'm going to come back to Casey again. What would you say? What would you say on this subject?
Oh, sorry, I messed up my mic.
So it's absolutely fine. Don't worry.
Wait, just double checking. Are we still talking about the statistics?
Yes. Well, we're talking about the statistics, but also, would you say that actually a lot of people do experience depression? It's not just 8 people out of 100 that the statistic is saying, that actually a lot of people, most people in the world actually might experience depression at some point.
Yeah, I think personally I am quite surprised at those numbers, because I think it is also quite hard to gauge, because there are different levels of depression, and people go through traumatic things in their life. For example, of going through the death of a loved one, you're going to feel depressed afterwards. So everyone does go through those mood stages. It's when it does actually become more of a disorder rather than a natural way to react to certain life events. So I think everybody in the world will experience some kind of depressive mood or some kind of depressive stage at some point in their lives. I think it's a very, very common thing that people go through. And I think sometimes it is a bit underspoken about, in a way, if that's a word, because I don't know, there's a lot of stigma around it.
I think that's definitely a good point about, like you were saying, about how I think at some point in someone's life they are going to experience a point of depression. They may not want to accept that. They may just think that they're being sad. Like you say, when a loved one has passed away, they get extremely sad. I think that definitely could be depression in most people. But I'm going to come back to Ollie again. Would you say that this is a realistic fact or figure we have here?
I think good points have been brought us so far, especially looking at trying to put statistics and numbers to quite qualitative data at the end of the day can be very difficult to do, because we have the whole issue of how do you get people reporting and get an accurate representation of the population. How can you get a good sample portion, because it's not something that's very proportional necessarily, if that makes sense, in terms of geographically spread. And as well, I think as we've been seeing a lot coming out of lockdown, for example, or whatever, is it seems to be that young people are disproportionately affected, which makes me wonder, when it says 3 in 100 people experience it in a lifetime, it's making me wonder, well, how recent is this? Is this looking at society and the generations we have now? How will it look in 20 years' time? Will it be because there's been such a pandemic of mental illness over the past sort of 20, 30 years? Will it look like a lot higher because a lot of the youth who wouldn't have experienced it maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago have started to experience these things more, or maybe they have experienced it, but as we're becoming more aware, we're able to put a finger to it. For example, if we're looking back a century or so ago, and you're looking to people reporting maybe low mood or depression relating from, or post-traumatic stress disorder from being involved in the war, in a time where people didn't have the words to describe it or put it to, they wouldn't have been marked forward as having this. So maybe there are some people who are older who have experienced and don't know. I think in the long and short of what I'm trying to say is it's always very difficult to find out. But I'd say, a bit like has been mentioned before, even if people don't experience depression as in being diagnosed with the continuous mental illness, people can feel depressed or feel they have periods of big low mood. I think grief can be a good example of that, where people can, if they don't find healthy ways and are able to cope with this, it can segue sort of into a longer term depression, whereas in the moment it might just be feeling depressed, having low mood, and it can be quite difficult because it's very it's walking a tightrope, I think, between the terms in a world where a lot of things are sort of losing their meaning a bit. Everyone can be quick to be like, everything's amazing, everything's awesome, therefore I'm depressed, can start getting thrown around a lot more than is actually representative.
I think those are really good points, and I definitely like the point about how, a century ago, this wouldn't even be considered. Mental health was sort of it didn't really exist. As I say, people from the war, they were just told to deal with it, and I think generations that have been brought up that way now sort of believe the same. Obviously, only recently has mental health been really pushed and sort of we've sort of everyone's sort of actually understanding that mental health really is a thing. So obviously lockdown again, I think that's been one that's really shown that mental health is definitely there, as a lot of people have experienced depression during lockdown, not being able to do the things they've wanted to do. So this brings me on to the stigma surrounding depression, and obviously, being sad in a low mood. I think, like I said about, those older generations, those people really didn't quite understand about how, mental health as an actual, condition that people get. And I think that's a lot with many mental health conditions that were back in the day. People wouldn't have recognized autism or just anything like that. But I think, as I say, the stigma, is anyone here personally, experienced any stigmas? I'm going to come to Bry first. Have you ever experienced any stigma around depression?
I think for me, it was never directly stigma from the word depression as such. It was never, oh, you're depressed, so therefore you're, this and that. It was more kind of the things that came with depression for me. So a lot of the time I felt extreme fatigue, and it was kind of almost a stigma around being labelled as lazy, when people didn't quite understand that it wasn't laziness. I just genuinely had no energy to kind of function. And I think as well, a lot of people couldn't understand why I was depressed. I was a young girl, my parents were still together. I was very lucky in that respect. I went to a decent school. I wasn't bullied. I had, nice house, 2 brothers. I even had a horse, and everyone just couldn't quite understand. They thought I had this sort of perfect life, and people didn't quite understand that depression is not always circumstantial. There are often circumstances that can contribute to it, but it's for a lot of people, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. And I think I wouldn't necessarily say it was stigma, but it was just sort of a lack of understanding that then led to people saying things that weren't quite fair or true.
I think that's a really good point about the idea about that. Well, I hate to use the expression, but money can't buy happiness, and I think that's so important when it comes to depression. I think I heard somewhere that the richest CEOs in the country can have depression because of because they there's nothing else to aim for in a sense. Also, the part about what was the part I was about to say about the idea of was it the stigma around depression? I believe it was. Oh yes, now I remember. It was the part about how you can. Oh no, I've completely forgotten. It's gone off the top of my head now. It's the part. I'm just going to move on from that. So I'm going to come to Casey now. Have you experienced any stigma around depression?
To be honest, this is the first time that I've ever really stopped to think about that, and I don't think I have experienced any stigma, especially with the people around me, but I think it's more of an issue of the internalized stigma. So in my head, I'm sat there and I'm thinking, I can't speak about this because if I show anyone that I'm actually putting on a front and I'm actually not okay behind the smile, then everyone's got to run away screaming and thinking, what's going on with this person? And I think it probably feeds back into that anxiety again, how that can be linked with depression, because I think there's a lot about how society used to be and how unaccepting we all used to be. But nowadays, I think if someone came up to me and they told me they were depressed, I know that I wouldn't judge, but I think that's just kind of become ingrained in us.
I think definitely about the harder part about, people not knowing about it. And I think that was one thing that I experienced myself, is that, until I joined our Young Advisors group, I didn't really know much about mental health myself. It never really occurred to me that mental health was really a thing. Not because I didn't know about it. Well, so I say, not because I didn't want to know about it. It's because you don't get taught this sort of stuff very, early on as a young age. It's more, obviously you get taught about physical injuries, but mental health is something that was very rarely talked about, especially when I was younger. But I'm going to come to Ollie now. Have you ever experienced yourself any stigma around depression?
I'm trying to think of examples. I think, if nothing else, something that has always surprised me in terms of mental health is, I guess, like Bry says, it's sort of the lack of understanding, and it's how something like, if you've got, everyone gives examples of physical injuries and about how people would never overlook them in the same way, or sort of try and I'm trying to think of the right word, try and sort of suggest that your experiences aren't as bad as they have been to you. And I think that's what surprised me, sort of people who I would have thought, who I perceived as being sort of like quite well-read, educated individuals, saying things sort of that suggest they just have no understanding about what it's like to suffer with mental health things, or just genuinely not knowing how to approach it, or thinking like, oh, well, why are they being in such a bad mood, or why are they acting like this, or even just a lack of awareness if we're going to the complete opposite direction. Because I think, like I think it was Bry mentioned it earlier, just as you can have periods of sort of great fatigue and feeling that you can't do anything, you can have those times where you overdo it and people are doing loads and loads and loads. And I think people have sometimes turned it sort of high functioning, depressive. And if you can get all these things done, then it means that you haven't got anything wrong. So if you do come out saying that you're feeling a bit bad or whatever, no one takes it as seriously as it can actually be. And it might just be that doing loads of these things is your coping mechanism for it. And you might do it. I know for me, I had it when I've had issues at uni where I felt it's got bad with low mood, and I'll have been doing like 14, 15-hour days, and then just not have very good coping mechanisms when I'm in the house to sort of de-stress or whatever. But continuing on like this, and as a result, you can very easily go under the radar because you don't come across as the stereotypical sat in bed crying all day version of depression that stigma can paint it out to be.
There seems to be a reoccurring theme here that uni seems to be where depression seems to happen most of the time. But I think one thing that I found about stigma depression is that it can be in the people that you least expect it. Some of the people that I've known that are the most resilient people, you know, especially when they're around other people, they act so confident, they act like they're the least person you could expect to have any mental health issues, but actually they're the ones that are really boggling it down and keeping it to themselves and actually don't talk about it. But that actually is going to bring me on to our next sort of topic I want to talk about, which is the impact of depression on possibly yourselves or friends and family. So I think we can each go around, we can share, if you want to, your own experiences, or friends and family that might have had it. I'll just start very quickly. So I'm going to talk about a friend of mine that I'd known for quite a long time. He was actually somebody that I used to know in the gym, and he was a person that you would least expect to have anybody having depression. But as I say, one day he just opened up to me about it, and it was just extremely boggling for me to learn that somebody that I'd known for so long had actually had thoughts of killing themselves and stuff and similar stuff like that. But as a friend, there was not really much I felt like I could do. I mean, obviously I could support them and such like that, and obviously try to let them know that I'm always there for them. But at the end of the day, what can you do for somebody who is suffering from depression? So that's something that I think I definitely want us to discuss here. So I'm going to come to Bry first. What would you say on that?
Sorry, what was that?
No, that's absolutely fine. So I'm just saying, like, somebody suffering from depression, it could be yourself, you can talk about your own experience, or, a friend or family that you might know of who's somebody who's suffering depression. What do you think you could have done to help them in any way?
So I've obviously only experienced depression myself. I've been quite lucky enough to not have a friend, that's really close contact that has suffered from depression or low mood. But I think it's kind of everyone. You'll always know somebody who's going for a rough patch, even if it's not quite technically depression. So I think the principles still apply. But for me, it was kind of just supporting me no matter what. And helping me to create that sort of support network, so that when I did come out the other side, that I had a really good network of people, but also not putting too much pressure on that support network. So I think, I don't know if I'm putting this across well, but
the way I'm hearing it is a sort of like a safe space almost. Like, you don't want to be, if you're finding stuff is getting too hard, you don't want to be pushed or or made to do anything.
Yeah, so having that support network, like having my family who understood, who I felt kind of open to talk to, creating a way of communication to them that was comfortable for me. So I was really bad with kind of talking about my emotions, and it would send me into sort of an anxiety attack every single time. So we kind of created our own little code. I had like a little smiley face chart that I could just let them know how I was feeling, and if I was feeling low, I'd just flip it to a sad face and that kind of thing. And having that support network, but without the pressure from the support network. So they never, pressured me to talk about how I was feeling. Or if I did put a sad face up, it was like, okay, Bry's feeling sad. We just need to, keep that extra eye on her, offer her, more cups of tea, just check in with her, maybe think about contacting the school if I was unable to get things done, because mine was during my school life, and putting those kind of extra things in place, but without pressuring me to talk about it or pressuring me, which I think is really hard as a parent, because you often worry, especially as I was quite so I was involved with self-harm in various different ways, and also I had attempted to take my own life quite a few times. So I think as a parent, it's really hard to know that your child is going through all this, and they were probably extremely worried about me, but they had to kind of just take that back seat. And once they did that, and I got professional help alongside being able to work with my family, it made a huge difference for me.
I think that point about parents having to know what they're capable of doing is so important. I mean, from my experience, like both my parents are doctors, and they themselves think they don't act obviously like they know everything, but they know obviously a lot when it comes to things in the medical profession. So when one of my brothers got extremely depressed, they felt like they were the ones that could help him the most. But actually, at some point, they just had to accept and realize, look, this is out of our hands. We can't do anything to help him really. We just have to let somebody else do this job. So I'm going to come to Casey now. Any experience that you've had, or when when you were having experience, do you think anything that somebody could have done to help you in that sort of depression side, or have you known a friend or family that you think you could have done? Is there anything that you would say that you could have done to help that sort of person?
I've sort of been on both ends of it. I've been through the depression myself, and there was someone that I used to be very, very close friends with, and she went through a really, really horrible depression. And as much as it was incredibly difficult for her, it was so hard sort of being that outsider and watching it happen, because you kind of recognize what you yourself put other people through at the same time. And it's a very scary thing to go through, because you see this person that you love and you care for, and it's hard because there's not really that much you can do at the end of the day. I mean, you can be there, and to anyone that is trying to support someone who's going through a lot, it's the best thing that you can do is just make it clear that you are there and just to be by their side. And it's really difficult, because that is basically all you can do. It's like with my friend, there'd be times that I'd just be too scared to go to sleep, because she was quite suicidal at the time. She actually ended up inpatient because of the amount of suicide attempts that she was making. And, there was a lot of sleepless nights. There was a lot of sort of late night phone calls and staying up all night with her just to make sure that she was okay and that she was alive by morning. It's not nice, but I'm always happy that I know that I did what I could to help her stay alive and help her get through it, to the point that she's now on the other side of that, and she's now actually happy to be alive, and she's no longer trying to make those attempts on her life. And I think it's not easy. You have to do what you can to be by their side and just make them aware that they do have a reason to live, and help them to realize that reason to live.
Feel free to say no to this. I just wanted to ask a question. Would you be able to share what you actually did to help them?
So it really depended on how she felt. I think I could, because I'd been through in the same sort of mood states myself, I could quite easily tell when she was at a very at-risk point and when she wasn't at risk. So sometimes I'd need to take her into the hospital. Sometimes I'd actually have to call 999 because she'd go running out and with the plan to go out and kill herself. So I'd actually have to make sure that someone, unfortunately, they'd have to restrain her and take her in, which it was not nice to watch, but it had to be done. And then there'd be times where she was in a suicidal mood, but I could tell that she wasn't going to do anything that night. So instead, I'd make a plan. So I'd take some face masks over, and we'd just have like a nice little pamper night. We'd sit in and we'd watch films, and I'd try and take her out and do things with her that would take her mind off of what she was going through. And I was trying to show her that she could be happy. So I don't know, it's hard to explain. I think showing her that she could be happy was a very big thing, because she was always so stuck in her own head and believing that she couldn't get out of it. So it was a lot of showing that life wasn't as bad as she thinks it is, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And I think one thing that I really find intriguing to hear from your perspective is the part about what it can do to others. So obviously I know you've suffered with depression, but somebody who may have not actually suffered with depression, when they are actually helping others with depression, it can really affect them as well. And that's one thing that I've definitely noticed with people who are helping others who are definitely in a low mood. It can actually really affect those as well. I mean, I from my personal experience, when during lockdown with my brother, it's been a very, very hard situation. There's been days where I've felt very, very depressed, just knowing that he's not getting better for different reasons. But I'm going to come to Ollie now. Have you ever felt like there's something that somebody could have done to help you if you've suffered depression, or would you say you've known friends or family that something that might have helped them?
I think the biggest thing that I can think of is just trying to be there and to try and set that boundary, I think, of not viewing yourself as like the cure, as the person whose sole responsibility it is to help someone else. So sort of trying to look at this from two sides, both as offering the support is obviously not something that's expected of any friend or family member, but everyone generally wants to just be able to support their loved ones and do what they can. And I think I found when I've suffered with low mood things, just people reaching out to check in, even if it's just saying like, hey, how are you? There's no pressure to respond, but just wanted to check in on you. Because I know sometimes, I think as it's been mentioned, you can get into your head a lot, and you can sort of convince yourself that you are a burden or you're in the way of things, and feel unable to then reach out for help. And you're just stuck in this horrible place of desperately wanting maybe someone to talk to, or someone else to feel that you're not in it by yourself, but feeling that it's the most horrible thing you can possibly do is to try and force someone else to get involved in your situation. So I think if you know someone is suffering, just reaching out, saying hello every now and then, but not putting it on the premise of sort of being like they have to respond, or that if they don't respond immediately, that means you have to go into all high alert mode, because it might just be that they feel they can't reply, or really like they feel they can't reach out to someone at that time. It's trying to set those careful boundaries of being the person there to help, but not taking it all on yourself, because at the end of the day, like it's not the job for you to be doing, because you probably won't be qualified to sort of know how to do it. But also as a family member, I know it's why they say that you shouldn't really take counselling or therapies from people who you already know, because it's too hard for these people who've already got these links existing between you. And I know I found it with some of my good friends who've struggled with things, that it's had a real big impact on me. And not trying to look at that sort of like, oh, look how hard it was for me, but I didn't anticipate how strongly I'd be affected in terms of feeling sort of low myself, feeling really worried about them, feeling that if I didn't have the solution, that I was failing as a friend or as a family member. And it's trying to find, like I said, that point of knowing that you've done what you've done, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to be everything, but doing your bit is enough.
I think there's really good points, by the way. But I think one thing that I want to say is that when it comes to somebody being depressed, it can be very hard to just know what to do with somebody like that. I mean, as I say, one day it can be sort of like they are just in a low mood. The next it can be suicidal thoughts, and it's very hard to not make a mistake or not do something that someone doesn't like. I know as well that people who can be depressed can actually feel even more depressed knowing that people are caring about them and worried about how they're feeling. That can make them feel obviously even worse. And I think one thing that we want to say to obviously friends and family out there as well is that somebody who's most likely got depression, they most likely not blame you for the way they're feeling. As I say, it most likely is a chemical thing that they're feeling that is causing them to obviously feel this way. Well, obviously it can be due to their surroundings as well. But one thing I just want to say is that if anyone is out there obviously suffering with depression, there are loads of websites out there that can help. Obviously there's the Mind website, there's NHS website, there's obviously child lines as well, helplines that can obviously help you as well. And you can also, one other thing I want to say is that you can obviously contact us, the Young Advisors, as well. So if anyone's ever actually having suicidal thoughts or feeling depressed, always feel free to contact us. You can get in touch with us via our website or on our social media pages as well, or in the comments as well if you're watching this on YouTube. But I'm going to move on to now the road to recovery of
Can I quickly jump in there before we do
absolutely fine, go ahead.
I think just linking into that, I think it's just distinguishing out quickly. I think if people are feeling in crisis, I guess the points to look for are probably if you've got a plan in place, a care plan in place, trying to follow the procedures in that. I think Samaritans is one. I think a good one for young people can also be Papyrus, if people have heard of that, which is sort of the charity for prevention of suicide in young people, which could potentially be a more accessible scheme than Samaritans at times. Because I know I've had friends who've gone to Samaritans and have found that because of the background within Christianity, that it's not helps them in the way that a more equal service might have done. And also linking into sort of with the Young Advisors, I guess the Young Advisors are here to sort of offer experiences and say what we've had, and we're always here to, if people want to share in non-crisis moments, I guess, ask us maybe questions about our experiences, how we might have dealt with it, but it's always under the premise just to make people know that at the end of the day, we're not the experts in the sense that we're not the practitioners here to help people and look after people. So yeah, we definitely advise looking out for, first and foremost, 999 Samaritans and Papyrus is what I'd say.
No, I'm actually really glad you've done that. Obviously, I'm as I say, not having depression properly experienced myself. I find it very hard to obviously know which are the best uses out there, the best helplines, the best websites that I use. If anyone else has got any suggestions, feel free just to say.
Just also to say that a lot of these websites and helplines can also be used by sort of family and friends if you're struggling with a friend or a family member that's got depression and it's impacting you personally. Don't be afraid to reach out to those websites, such as Samaritan and things like that, or looking on websites to read up about it. The NHS website gives you a lot of sort of basic information of how to possibly refer a friend or to get a friend referred to a service and things like that. They can be really useful. Just because you might not necessarily be going through the depression yourself, there are still emotions attached to that, and it's important to keep yourself in check. So feel free to use those resources if need be.
Really well said, Bry.
Casey, is there anything you would like to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say there is a page on the NHS website that does have a really extensive list of a lot of different services. So it has ones for men's mental health, eating disorders, PTSD, all sorts of different things. I can try and find that and see if we can link it in the description. And secondly, I want to say that your GP is there as well. A lot of people don't realise that your GP is there for your mental health as well as your physical health. They can refer you to any sort of external services that you might need for sort of counselling. And that's even if you are the loved one of someone that's going through something as well. So never shy when it comes to speaking to your GP, because they are there.
Has anyone got anything else they'd like to add, or should we move on?
I guess the final thing is try not to. I feel there's so much you can add on this, but just for my final little comments on it. In that there are all these services out there, and sometimes it might be that you have to try going through a couple. Or, for example, I know at my GP practice at university, some people would go in and have a really negative experience, and some people have a really positive experience, and it might just be you have to try 2 or 3 times sometimes, and it can feel difficult and overwhelming. So if you do have someone who can take you to the appointments and sort of be there to help sort of support you through it if you feel you need that, because sometimes it is that you have to try a couple of times to find the route that suits you, and that's completely okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with anyone. Sometimes it is just there's not a fit between the practitioner and you as an individual, and don't be afraid to say, really sorry, but this isn't working for me. Would it be possible for me to try and see someone else in this practice, or be referred to somewhere else where I feel that I could be treated in a way that would better suit me? We have to have patient-centered care.
Well, is anybody else anything else to share? If that's fine, we'll move on to our next topic, which is the road to recovery. Recovery, in a word itself is kind of a stigma, because I mean, what does recovery even mean? I'm just going to sort of share what I think the word recovery means, and I think it simply is not wanting to kill yourself. I think anything from that is truly like, I wouldn't say like you're fully recovered or anything like that, but I think like if somebody's not on the verge of trying to kill themselves, consider that a win. Don't worry about them having to do anything else. Just get into that state, because then you can build off that. I think if your expectations are too high and recovery for you is this person who can't get out of bed is to then go and get a job and get and do a regular thing during the day, I think that's far too much of a high expectations. I think you need to look at it more as just like get them to a point where they feel happy and they feel comfortable. So I'm going to come to Bry first yet again. What would you say to recovery? What does that even mean to you?
So I think recovery is very different for a lot of people, and everyone in kind of the mental health profession describes recovery as a journey, and it's like going down that roads are different lengths, different sizes, there's different obstacles, bumps, all that. So for everyone, you have your own road and your own sort of end destination and start point. So for some people, depression doesn't necessarily mean that you are, say, suicidal or self-harming, but those are sometimes things that are associated with it. But for me, where I was at at that point where I was extremely suicidal, self-harm, and I was actually in an inpatient ward, and that was probably at my lowest of low. So for me, my start journey was quite extreme. So for me, just getting I had several stop points along the way. So getting to the point where I would get out of bed and I could stop self-harming as much, or the suicidal attempts would become fewer, and that was just one point along the road. And then from there it was working towards perhaps being able to go out and do more things with my friends and certain things like that. And then obviously the end point is, well, actually for me, I don't know if there is an end point. I think it's kind of just dealing with the way my brain works, the way my brain is, and possibly will be for the rest of my life. And it's just putting those sort of kind of methods in place to help me. So my recovery has been, I'd say, ongoing and very up and down, but also I would like to say I'm recovered, but it's a strange one. It's everyone has a different kind of relationship with the word recovery and the feeling of being, say, recovered.
And I think that's a really good point you've made there, Bry. And I think this is the whole point about recovery, is that recovery is sort of a spectrum. So people have different perspectives about what they think the word recovery means. So I'm going to come to Casey now. From your experience, what does recovery even mean? Does it mean just getting better, or is it something else?
I mean, I think it's important that everyone understands that recovery is not a straight path upwards. You always hear relapse is a part of recovery, and it's so important to remember that. I think it's a learning process, and you don't come out of it the same person that you were before your depression. I always say it's kind of like a system update in a way. So it's like you're a version of you, but you're a better version of you, because you've been through this really difficult thing, but you've fought it and you've gone against it, and you've actually managed to come out on the other side, which is amazing and impressive. But I think it is also, I think Bry sort of touched upon this a bit, where you don't ever really completely recover. Like, you will still always have that part of you there. And I think it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. And I really like that quote, because it is very true. You learn how to live with how your mental health works, and you learn how to be happy with that and to be comfortable in yourself. And I think that's always really important for anyone to bear in mind that is going through recovery.
I think that part about accepting it and just learning to live with it is truly important. There is no, there's not one day you're not going to wake up and suddenly feel like it's gone or anything like that. It's going to be there with you for life. Ollie, the word recovery, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I guess it's. If you could put it on a spectrum, I guess it's where you're not, conditions aren't deteriorating, you're not plateauing, but you've made some sort of progress. And I think the thing is to remember is it isn't necessarily linear. It won't necessarily be, I've got from stage B to stage C, and recovering means I'm now back to stage B to stage A. Oh, I'm cured and everything's gone. It can be, you've got to stage G, and then you go to stage E, and then you're down further, and then you're back a little bit. But I think recovery is the process where you're starting to make more positive progress than potentially relapses that are taking place. And recovery can mean so many things. It can mean someone who's maybe had minor experiences, maybe with stuff like social anxiety, or what we call like low mood disorder, and maybe they've been experiencing this and it's been impacting them slightly less, and maybe that's part of their recovery, is their day-to-day routine is resuming in a way where they're less affected by it. But equally, the road to recovery could be someone being what you could see as quite a big formal step of being discharged from maybe inpatient care to being an outpatient and receiving services in the community once more. If you're looking at it from CAMHS, I know there's the tier system working from tier 1 through to 3 and above, where you're getting more severe and needing more sort of direct emergency care as it's progressing. So maybe if you're looking at it in terms of CAMHS, it might be someone being discharged from a higher level service to a lower level one. But it's different to everyone, I guess, and very dependent on the condition.
So what about starting the journey of recovery? Because that is something that's obviously not easy to do, because especially when you're at such a low point where you, as I say, the energy, one of those big things where you just don't have the motivation to do anything. The idea of actually starting the road to recovery, how does one even do that? So I'm going to once again come to Bry first. How do you think the best way to start the journey of recovery?
I think it's kind of being honest and realistic with yourself. So I know for me that a lot of the time I said I was going to really try to set myself on that journey, and in all honesty, when I reflect on it, I wasn't ready to start that journey. I was so in such a dark place and so deep into my emotions that I wasn't ready to make those steps, because recovery is hard. It's really hard, and it takes mental strength to be able to go, okay, I'm going to pick myself up and I'm really going to try not to do these habits that I've been doing, or try to fight those urges when I really don't want to be here. So for me, yeah, I'd just say be honest with yourself and be realistic. You can't try unless you really want to try, and no one can force you to do it either. So you've got to get to a point in your illness where you realize that you can't go on like this anymore, and that you need to start putting the things in place to get there. Yeah.
I really like that point. That was actually something I was going to follow up and ask, obviously, about is, would you say that you have to make the decision to start your recovery? Nobody else can force you.
Yeah, I think it's, obviously it's your illness, it's your head, your body, and ultimately it's your life. So there's nothing that anybody can do. Obviously, there can be people who help you along the way, professionals who can work with you to kind of change your mindset, or put coping mechanisms in place for you, or you've got like family and friends who can support you when you're feeling a bit low and things like that. But ultimately, no one can force you to make those steps towards getting better. And for me, unfortunately, I had to get almost to the darkest place of my mind, and then it was there that I just had to make that decision as to whether I got better or I kind of stayed there forever. And I think seeing my parents, struggling because they didn't know what to do,
Just
seeing my friends, I made that decision to work my little butt off.
I just one final question to you, just about this is just, would you say that it's worse if someone tries to force you to recover, and you should be allowed to do it at your own pace?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's worse, because obviously I understand the reasons behind it. People just care, and sometimes care too much, and it can affect people. But I wouldn't say it's worse. I'd just say sometimes it can almost perpetuate a cycle of failure, because unless you've flicked that switch, like I say in my head, unless you flick that switch to kind of go on that road to recovery, and you kind of half-heartedly attempt recovery, and then obviously it doesn't work, it can just perpetuate that failure. And people will keep going, oh, but why is it not working, why are we not getting anywhere? And then I think a lot of the time it can make you feel like you've failed, when in all reality you actually weren't on the journey in the first place.
I think that's really important. Casey, people starting the road to recovery, what would you say is the best way to go about even comprehending doing something like that?
I agree a lot with what Bry has said. Like, you do really have to be in the right headspace for it. I think you have to sort of let your mental health travel its course, and you will get to a point where you start to realize that, I don't know, it's like something just ever so slowly clicks in you, where you start to think, I want to get better, I want to get out of this, and you start to take those steps. And what I would suggest is that you need to start being honest with yourself. I think when we're depressed, we lie a lot, because we're so used to sort of pretending that we're fine and pretending that everything's okay. But we need to start saying, no, everything isn't okay, but there's no problem with that. We can sort it. And you need to start speaking to the people around you, seek help. And one of the big things that I think people really underestimate is your lifestyle. So for me now, I avoid doing things like drinking and try to keep myself in a healthy diet and things like that. It's not always possible, but it actually makes such a huge impact on your mental health. Just basic daily needs. Make sure that you're eating properly. Make sure that you are getting your fruit and veg and you're getting a good night's sleep. I mean, I feel like a bit of a parent saying all of this, but it is true, and it is really good for you. Like, it can be hard to get into the routine of it, but once you're there, and I feel like it does actually make quite a big impact on your mental health.
It's interesting that as well, that what you've said there is that they're very, it's nothing too complicated. It can be very simple things. I say, like you said, just going to bed early, getting a good night's sleep can really just make a difference about how you might feel the next day. Ollie, starting the road to recovery, what do you have to say about that?
I feel a lot of good points have already been mentioned in it, in terms of that it can be difficult because you can't always feel in the mood to want to get better. I think that can be a difficult thing for outsiders to understand, is that sometimes the reason that people don't seem to be making any progress for so long is because they're really at the end of everything, and they don't see the point of even trying to look towards a better tomorrow for things. And I think just the start of that recovery journey can just be the simple mindset of going from, do you know what, I think I am going to try and see what could come after this. I think Casey said some great points sort of about maybe trying to break it down as steps, I guess, as if you look at lifestyle, and there's some things that have just been proven to increase well-being in terms of like exercise, in terms of maybe eating healthily, in terms of things to avoid like depressants such as alcohol, or having irregular sleep patterns or whatever, and just trying to notice your triggers, I guess, can be the small steps that you can make, even if it might feel that you're getting nowhere. Putting in effort, it might be nice to have a chance to sort of put effort into something that can help you feel like you're making some progress, even if you feel that it's a massive journey and you have no idea where to go. So just breaking it down, I guess, into steps, not putting yourself under pressure to try and achieve things by a certain date, and also try not to feel disappointed in yourself if the journey is a 2-step forward, 1 step backward situation, because it's still a step forward, and you should be proud of yourself for every one of those you're able to make.
I think one important point as well to mention is that it's different for everybody. I don't think anybody has a same journey. I don't think anyone can be compared to somebody else when they're on the road to recovery. Is there anything you would like to say about that?
Yeah, I'd just like to kind of reiterate that it's not the same for everybody. Some people it takes years with several relapses. Some people it's quite a quick recovery, and I think each illness as well is very, very different, because recovery for other illnesses might not look the same as depression, and then how that can interplay. So recovering from anxiety and depression, one can often be easier to overcome than the other for certain people, and it's just kind of understanding that it's different for everybody, and to look at each individual as an individual and just support them through it, regardless of how long it takes them or how they go about doing it and things like that.
Casey, is there anything you'd like to add on how the journey of recovery might be different for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. It's you're on your own journey. I think make sure that you don't compare yourself to others, because that can really get you down sometimes. If you are taking longer than, I don't know, the person stood next to you, it doesn't mean that you're failing in your recovery. It's just that's your journey. That's what you need to do to get there, if that makes sense.
No, I that definitely does make sense. Ollie, anything you'd like to add on that?
I think a lot of it's been covered, really. I can't think of much more original points I'd have to.
No, that's absolutely fine if there's nothing to add. Well, I guess I'm just going to obviously give it out to everybody now. Is there any final thoughts anybody would like to talk about on the subjects we've mentioned so far? If not, that's absolutely fine. But if I think for me personally, I think as I say, I can only speak from somebody who's known people who've had depression, and I think it can be one of these things where time is a great healer. I hate to say it when I have a physical problem, but time really can make a difference, and you need to look at these things as I think. I can't remember. It might have been Casey who said that these things can take years to get better. We don't look at them in such a short time span. You need to look at them on a much grander scale. Look at them almost for their entire lives. As I say, mental health doesn't go anywhere, and it will be there for your whole life. So you need to look at it on a much bigger scale. But if anyone has anything else to say, anything else anyone would like to say before I round it out?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, so if anyone has any, if you're watching on YouTube, please, feel free to comment down below any questions you'd like us to answer, or because we might be doing a Q&A at some point, or if there's anything you'd like us to talk on our next podcast, please feel free to put that down below. Also, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can obviously go to our website or follow us on our social media, or Twitter or Instagram. But we're just going to finish on a little quote for the end of this podcast. Ollie, do you want to take it away?
Yes. Well, I think from having a look, I wanted to sort of give people a bit of insight into what's known as Project Semicolon. And so for people who aren't aware of this, there's been a sort of movement towards sort of trying to support this resilience around recovery from depression, or not from recovery, and like you're struggling with depression, low mood, suicidal tendency, self-harm. And people have seen anything about it in the news or in social media, whatever, but there's been sort of a growing trend of people who have maybe suffered with conditions such as these, getting small semicolon tattoos maybe on wrists or on arms, potentially in areas where they might have self-harmed before. But the meaning behind it is to try and create this greater feeling of solidarity and support within the community of people who've struggled with mental illness. And I just wanted to read one of the project statements they released, because it was a nice sort of uplifting note to end it on, which was, a semicolon is used when an author could have chosen to end their sentence, but chose not to. The author is you, and the sentence is your life.
I think that's a really deep meaning behind that, like the idea of carrying on and not giving up. But we're going to round it off there. Once again, if anyone has any suggestions of what you would like us to talk on the podcast, feel free to get in touch and let us know. But other than that, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.